Welcome to HSBC Global Viewpoint, the podcast series that brings together business leaders and industry experts to explore the latest global insights, trends, and opportunities. Make sure you're subscribed to stay up to date with new episodes. Thanks for listening, and now on to today's show.
I'm Jonathan Yip, Asia Head of HSBC Innovation Banking. Today we're recording this episode from Mumbai, where we recently celebrated the launch of HSBC Innovation Banking in India. Joining me today is Anand Jain, co-founder of CleverTap, one of India's most remarkable SaaS success stories in recent years. Anand, welcome to the show.
Hey, thank you for having me, and congratulations on the launch.
Thank you. It was incredible energy. We had 200 to 300 founders joining us, and it was an incredible success, and thank you for the kind words. So I wanted to start off with the origin of your story, and I was wondering if you could tell us a little bit about what was the spark behind CleverTap.
We noticed that every message, every recommendation to the user was, didn't make any sense at all, right? It was not contextual and not tied to what the user would do on those properties, right? Like if you did X, you might not receive something like, that's meant for that, for you. And then, as engineers, we kind of wanted to go down to the root of like, hey, why is this happening? And we realized that the brands, they collect a lot of user information, right? All the digital footprints, but it's very hard for them to marry what the user did, with actually the communication or the personalization. And it is because they end up using like 7 to 8 different tools, so you might have a vendor for email, you might have another vendor sending SMSs, you might have a third vendor doing product A/B testing on your website. And this data would be, spread across multiple data silos. And I think that kind of gave us a spark, to start CleverTap, that
Creating some organization around the different data feeds that are coming into
Exactly, right? What if you could kind of put all this data in one place, right? And use this as a single source of truth for activating this data in real time. And I think the product philosophy was not to build just a dashboard where you can look at the numbers, but it can actually respond to user behavior in real time, right?
When you brought that idea up from just conception to just mobilizing it, what were some of the early pain points that you had to navigate through?
Yeah, in the early days, it was very hard for us to go convince businesses because they were so used to this idea of buying 7, 8 products. The email team would buy an email product, the product team would buy some sort of a recommendation engine. And it was very hard for us to go preach this idea that, you should go in and, you should look at this as a unified customer journey. Your customer doesn't care what products you're using behind the scenes, right? So that was a little hard for us, but I think we got lucky, we had a couple of very early pilots. Those customers saw the benefit of using a unified platform.
And did you find those customers first, or did you build the solution first?
We actually started building the solution because this is my third startup, so
phenomenal.
You get a little bit carried away, thinking, hey, I know the answer, but very quickly you start, when you find that customer, so we had this a little bit built up, we started showing around the product, whatever the product in that form and shape was. And then we got someone interested in that. Book My Show is the name of the customer.
Book My Show.
Book My Show. They're in the movie, movie ticketing as well as events and
that's a big customer. How did that? Tell us a little bit about how you felt when you landed that client.
It was. I think I felt a lot of responsibility. Hey, this is such a big customer. How do I get them to use my product in the right way.
Right.
And I think they were sold on the philosophy, this makes complete sense, hey, one single source of truth for all customer data, and the ability to send you back communication, in response to what you came looking for, right? Makes complete sense. So how do we, so they got convinced. Implementation, of course, was it took us
as with any startup.
No, actually, it was pretty quick, actually, a couple of weeks, and we were rolling, in their production systems, but then right after that, you feel immense responsibility, hey, I hope that we don't screw up anything for them.
Totally.
Very early days for us. I think that journey, for them, where a couple of product managers used to watch the dashboard maybe once a week, around the weekend, when the movies kind of, people go and watch movies, all the way to using it for all 7 days, the multiple teams, product teams, engineering teams, marketing teams, growth teams, BI teams, all looking at the same sort of data. And then I think they, they had a great experience.
And was it that moment that created the validation that you had something that the market would really, really admire, and you had a solution that could really take off?
I think the validation for us was probably customer number 4, because it may work for one, it may not work for the second,
number 4.
So you have 3 or 4 customers in parallel using your product, and just trying out the same solution, same product. So you're not customizing for them, you're co-creating with them, right? And the difference is that you're listening to one customer, understand what their problems are, etc. You abstract it up, and then you build something that works for all 4 of them. And we were very lucky to get customers across different domains, right? And that, after 4 or 5 of those, we felt confident that we have achieved product market fit.
Oh, phenomenal. And were these 4 customers from India?
Yes, they were.
And what was so special about India that made your product work and allowed you to take it global?
Yeah, when we started in 2013, it was pretty audacious for us to think about building something from India and then scaling it globally. But I'll tell you what worked for the India ecosystem, what worked for us, right? These were early days for the mobile ecosystem. The sub $100 Android devices, made it possible for a large population to not only get the phones and use them for, just using the apps, but also made it like a part of their lifestyle, right? Especially on the banking side, etc. So you get a vast playground, where you have multiple, several hundreds of millions of users, using consumer products, right? You have different kind of, India is a diverse country, so you have diversity of language, but you also have diversity of device form factors, you have diversity of network connection, all sorts of things, the language barrier, right? So that gave us the confidence to go spread this. I think also around the time, the India stack, if I can call it that, around payments, UPI, Aadhaar, all of these things were coming together.
Let's talk a little bit about that, because for the international audience, people don't understand, how much progress India has made in the last 10 years. And whether it's UPI and the tech stack and identification, maybe if you could just frame it, because I think it's really magical how you were able to take a solution and scale it across India before you're now scaling internationally.
Yeah, I mean, the last decade in India has been phenomenal, in terms of innovation, not only for the consumer apps, but also financial products, just by having a very simple unified payment interface, where you can just use, a very simple QR code, you just scan it and you can pay without having to worry about what bank and, credit limits and those kind of things, right? So this got created in the last decade. It has scaled now at a population level, population scale. There are multiple companies that take advantage of that, their solutions built on top of the UPI payment ecosystem. There is Aadhaar, which is like a unified biometric
identification
for India. Then there is the Indian payment stack. There is a lot of B2B components kind of hidden, not visible, but this entire infrastructure is open, is interoperable, and like I said, it's
modular. You can build on
scale,
it.
Billion people scale.
Yeah, so we've always been very impressed with India, the ability to build the utility that brings the fabric of commerce together, the interoperability, the modular kind of build. It really is a collaboration between public and private enterprise in creating value. And I can see why it's really allowed you to scale in this market. But as you're thinking about internationally, how does that kind of play into your international ambitions, and how do you take some of the good work that you've done here in India and apply it to different markets where it might not be structured in a similar way?
Yeah, I think scaling internationally is not just about taking the product, to an international market, but also doing an infrastructure fit. The rules around data residency, privacy, consent, etc., might be different for every country, right? Then there are elements of localization. The language, while thankfully, having this built CleverTap in India, we are used to multiple languages and different kind of, diversity of devices and all that. It helps us scale internationally, especially in countries like Europe and South America, where, the local language is a very important flavor of how you do business. And then there are things like, WhatsApp, it's probably dominant
That's
in
a global
India.
platform.
Now it's a global platform, but 5-7 years ago, it was not very, there were other platforms that you had to integrate with. And then providing local billing, local customer success team, which is a very important element. So you're not trying to service customers out of one geography. You're trying to give them in-region support, and in-region marketing, etc. Like that's how we scaled CleverTap.
How do you see your company in the next 3 to 5 years? And I think I'd love to kind of get your thoughts on AI and how that integrates into your business model.
Yeah, let's start with AI. I think especially the last 3 years, the rise of large language models, LLMs as we call them, and Gen AI solutions on top of that actually truly liberates marketing. Most of the marketing platforms, you can do a multivariate test, you can do like a product A/B test, version A, version B, version C, and then you're kind of done. And you do targeted marketing, right? So you take a group of users and you send them a product. With AI, now you can actually send each person the product that might be the best fit for them in the language that works for them, with the creative that works for them.
At the channel that works for them.
At the channel that works for the right time.
And the time that works for them.
And also, the right workflow for them. Hey, should we send a couple of reminders? Should we just send once? Should we even send any message at all?
Right.
So I think finally, and that's why it's very exciting for us, at CleverTap, what we are building, in the next 3 to 5 years, although my product team tells me that it'll be all done by early next year. The reality is, what we're building is, the product will be outcome obsessed, and the outcome for any business is ROI, right? So, given a goal of ROI, what are the various things I can do with my users to make sure that whatever message I send to them, whatever communication, or when they're on my app or my website, it's completely personalized to their taste. It is built just for them.
I just find it incredible, as you're scaling this globally, you guys are effectively the brains behind, customer satisfaction and value creation without anyone knowing that you guys are behind it.
Yeah, it's an immense responsibility for us also, right? So while we are growing along with the rest of the world economy, right? But making sure that our brands, the brands that work with us, my customers, are getting an exponential value from my product. They're using this product not just to kind of what we call as batch and blast, but to do very meaningful customer engagement, going from just looking at installs, right, or downloads, to actually retention, how many of my users come back to me regularly, and even if they're not buying a product right now, but maintaining that loyalty or the relationship with the customer, so that they end up whenever they're ready to buy something, whenever they're ready to renew the subscription, they do that. Yeah. So it's immense responsibility.
And as you guys get better, I'm assuming it's incredibly more difficult to switch agents or switch brains.
Yeah, that's not even the moat. I think the moat is winning customer trust. Even for us, retention is as a B2B business. Retention is an amazing theme for us. We learn a lot from our customers, right? And we incorporate that into the product. So hence,
that's the moat.
Continue to, yes, exactly. They continue to get value.
Understand your customers and bring that into the business model.
Yes. Yeah. So that they see what they kind of, what my customers looking for is what they get in the product. And, frankly, we are not in the consumer business, but we learn a ton from different brands, from banks, from retail, from streaming apps, food delivery, gaming, and all of this is kind of baked into the CleverTap product.
Can I talk about your vision for your company over? Let's not talk 3 to 5 years. Let's talk 10 years. What is CleverTap? If you were to summarize that.
Yeah, we want to become the central nervous system for any business,
central nervous system.
Yeah, you're processing customer data. You're ingesting, processing, and activating all of this in real time, right? So much like a physical store, if you walk into a physical store, the people who are in the store, they kind of know that someone just walked in, or if you're at the checkout counter, they kind of see you've got a shopping cart full of things, and they might actually say, why don't you come over to aisle number 4 or till number 4, and then we'll do the checkout for you separately because you just a large shopping order. So getting to an extremely high level of personalization, we call this 1:1 or hyper personalization, right? We even have a term for this. It's called individualization.
Individualization.
Right? Getting to that for all the brands.
For all their customers.
All their customers. And, just making it feel very, very natural, like a good friend, who knows you from before.
Right.
Showing you the right sizes for products that you buy, showing you the right colors, and so on and so forth.
And it's a very good balance, right? How do you balance trust with customization, with privacy in the context of regulations? Yes. And it really sounds like you guys are are thinking about that all in the right way.
And I can throw in a banking metaphor there, like, we are like a bank, like, we hold, you guys hold our money, like, we hold like customers' data.
Right.
As the absolute, like, uncompromised trust on that, like, there is no way that can get compromised. Like, we have, from a security perspective, from a privacy perspective, and we are just custodians of the customer data, like, my customers' data, and they can use it for, understanding user behavior and all that.
Well, Anand, that's extremely inspirational. I really wanted to thank you for joining us today and spending the time to have a conversation with us. HSBC Innovation Banking is launched in India. We're super proud to support you guys, and we hope you guys continue to grow with much success around the world.
Hey, thank you for hosting me. It was a pleasure to chat with you, and wish you all the best. Like, I'll go see a lot more of HSBC in India.
Oh, absolutely. Thank you.
Thank you.
So India, it's clear. 10 years ago, it was a high potential emerging market. Today, we see a confident, resilient, market-driven growth driver for the global innovation economy. At HSBC, we've allocated over $1 billion to support the innovation ecosystem. We're so proud of the team that we have on the ground here, and I look forward to seeing you guys next time.
Thank you for joining us at HSBC Global Viewpoint. We hope you enjoyed the discussion. Make sure you're subscribed to stay up to date with new episodes.